Yes, thank you so much. We will have to be a bit short because of the time frame of the conversation. We have to keep the schedule. I would like to start to say, say thank you for the reading and the readings and the text. And it's exciting also for me because we are so many partners. We don't know about all the plays that have been written. We know about some of the plays that have been involved, but not about all of that because it's 9 plays. So it's interesting also. It will be interesting to get to know all the plays that have been developed so many different places in Europe. But I'd like to open with sort of asking Paul, what is your first impression about all these projects developing at the same time? From your sort of theories and ideas, and what is your first sort of impression when you get sort of touch with these different texts?
Well, first I want to appreciate all the work everybody's doing, and it's very compelling. And the performances were great. Actors, you guys really did a great job. It was always in the moment when you were up there, and it was very committed. It was very compelling. All the readings. It's a diverse array of stuff here, right? So, fitting it within polylocality, I think there are varying degrees of that. I think the first piece is very compelling with this idea of immigration and being in another country and how one positions oneself. Reminded me a bit of the character in Disgraced, where he has to say he's of one ethnicity to fit in and kind of compel himself to be able to exist, to coexist in the society that he did in America. And it's something that's really happening right now in America. It's terrible, right? With children being separated at the border, and people are going crazy about it. It becomes a very, very problematic issue. And I like the multicultural aspect of that too. In the clash of cultures, this guy looking at the German woman, and as he approaches her, the smile. And this is all very subtle, but beautifully written stuff. The Rubik cube, fantastic. The woman, you just get the idea of the refugee. They have this whole thing right now in America where the people who are coming up and then being rejected at the border and being apart from the mother, and how the exploitation that takes place that's going on right now with lost children. It's very compelling, right? Right now, it's absolutely right down the middle in terms of what's going on in the world. It may be a little bit more difficult because to understand it dramaturgically, because I know there's multiple parts to the story. Yes, there are other parts to it. Is there interaction, or is it mostly monologues?
No, you have a lot of interaction also that I put the text in theory.
Yeah.
And on the stage it's not in this way, but it's more a puzzle, and also the public take part of
Yeah, that's the Rubik cube puzzle part of it. That's
The idea is that the public make a walk, like to walk on a bridge from a point to another. It's a part of the place. They are the migrants, also for this. So Aurora, they are put in camionettes. They are being in another place. They have to help them to find solution on to survive or to cross the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Yeah.
It's more an experience, theatrical experience that not traditional play in this sense.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit difficult to explain. It's more than in the dynamic of a funa, but also with text and with exchange, that not the traditional frontal way.
Right.
So in order to help a little bit our public, I put all text together.
No, it gives the idea. I thought like the plumber, man. I saw a guy with a Make America Great hat, the red hat. And so he's talking to this political figure who hates him just because he is there, and yet he's dealing with it. That kind of compelling
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are the parallels you see that are resonating, so I think that's.
No, I love this part because it's so sensible.
The-
Also, how your
Yeah,
identity
yeah.
can change just
Well,
because.
that's very, very, the second piece, fantastic performance, we should applaud your work, that was very good. I mean, I think you know, we were talking about form, is that one piece among other pieces?
It's more a case I'll speak. No, it's not. It's just one. It's one large piece. I mean, I suppose at the minute it is a monologue, but that's just kind of a draft, and it's kind of a day story at the minute. So we're gonna be putting that apart and trying to piece it, and bringing in those other stories that are kind of within it.
Yeah, you know, it's great. It's a great story, and it's linear. It's a linear narrative. Because you were saying, you know, think about form. I was thinking like.
That is what we're thinking about it, both in terms of this narrative, you know, going from A to Z really, and how
Right.
you can take that, deconstruct that.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I was thinking of Naomi Azuka's Good Kids, where, for example, if you wanted to do that, I mean, where you would take the narrative and then, so it's all his perspective right now. Basically, it's his POV. So I mean, in other words, you know, so you get Bill's perspective, and maybe you get the guy who he meets in the room, and so but you have a cast that just plays a bunch of different roles with the major characters. So that's the kind of thing.
Or how could you tell it in a more metaphorical view in terms of how the film might be able to set in. And also what I think is interesting about it, because I know Fionnuala is a writer and great writer, and first and foremost, her at the forefront of her sensibility is because every story in her play is a true story that has happened to the young people who shared the story with her. So I think we've got to the stage now where the ethics around that are so intact, but the theatricality that's what we're losing at the moment. That we have to, so you have to kind of release yourself a little bit from the ethical journey of telling the truth of the young people who shared their stories, and then move it to the next stage, which I think is where we're at, of trying to find the dramatic form and release it from those strictures a little bit, because it's like this weird thing where it's not verbatim, but it is. I mean, we did a reading of it in Belfast, and there were 3 or 4 young people whose stories are in the play, who were listening to the reading, and that brings with it, you know, a whole kind of pressure or sense of responsibility as a writer for film.
So you basically compiled several stories into one story. Is that like a?
Well, taking inspiration from the interviews and fictionalising them.
Yes.
So it is different young people's stories. So I think if we are bringing in other voices or finding another way to bring out those voices that are within the script, it would be the voices of the young people than say Bill or the social workers, or because there are people we hear about all the time, there are people that always get to speak, and it's the young people who aren't. So I think that might be a good thing.
Yeah. You know, it's like you have it now. It's compelling. I mean, but I agree with you. I mean, if you want, you don't want it to. Do you want it to be a one-person show, or it's, you know, do you want to break up these characters so that these become almost like a story in a story theater kind of sense, so that the stories are interacting with each other. It goes. There's other forms like this, you know, Lamford Wilson did Rhymers of Eldridge, kind of where characters are switching. Now you can do this with a bunch of the young people playing the older parts too, but seeing it through the younger characters rather than having it be, you know, older people. There was a show I saw at Humana was like this, where you have one major character, but the ensemble is playing a tremendous amount of different characters. You know, so that would be one clash or collision of narratives, but always having a kind of sort of the narrative moving in and out through it. You see, so I thought that was a very interesting way of storytelling that used multiple characters, but actors playing multiple characters in that sense. I mentioned Good Kids because that was about like with date rape, you know, and it was a bunch of kids, good kids, right? She wrote it for that age, you know, your age group, around 17 or 18, that kind of thing. But how they all interacted with each other and how this all came about. But the narrative split, and then the kids became the parents, you know, and part of it was face front, and then part of it was interacting and so forth. So as I was listening, you know, hearing the story, I mean, I was visualizing like, you know, those kind of potentialities to open it up, theatricalize it by using, you know, I think you're right, use adolescents, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's very powerful stuff. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Paul? A lot of this material is sort of documentary or sort of connection to things read in newspapers or that are really happening around us. Do you think that this documentary aspect makes also sort of polyvocal layer to the material, or what do you think about that? How do you relate to documentary theater? Because this is sort of in Norway there is some discussion also about that, and there are some very famous directors and writers, and they used to do interviews, and you know, and then from interviews they create text, you know, and sort of how do you approach this kind of way of
Well,
work?
it's kind of like the living newspaper, like, you know, placards, the streets, Brechtian was, yeah, that's right. I think the difference is, you know, having an ensemble, is to have the ensemble, you know, moving in and out of different characterizations, and not trying to type, you know, because of what you're saying is that you want it to be through the voice of children. So you don't have a type, like you wouldn't get one type who plays the adult and one type who plays, you know, the strip model or something. Would be fluid within the ensemble in that sense. So it wouldn't be you were trying to make a relationship, a one-to-one relationship with the character and their age, you know, type, but rather have it be one group of, you know, adolescents.
Because when they talk, it seems like the material itself has a voice and a will, and then there's a sort of the will and the voice of the writer. And this sort of, do you think, you know, you can make these two voices to exist at the same time and be in conversation, like within in dialogue within the play, or do you think one has to take over for the other?
What do you mean, like a scenography thing?
No, I'm talking about writing. They're like, I mean, when they do these interviews, they collect this material. This material has a voice, has a will. It's going somewhere, you know, and you see they relate to this material, like, you know, they feel like they can't manipulate it too much, right? But then there is the voice of the writer.
Right, yeah, that's what you mean. I mean, like, one of the things is, you know, interacting with voiceovers from the tapes, actually bringing some of the tapes back into it would be something that could be done. When the characters related to the voice of the interview, or contradicting with the interview is like saying, well, wait, you know, the author's taking this in a different way, you know, this is fiction, you know, so there's a confrontation within the text itself. It could be quite compelling.
Nice. And what about the third text?
Yeah, that was a very strong performance you guys did, and very emotionally compelling. I was curious as to how you guys are assembling the text in terms of, you know, the writing of it. Like, are you working with, is it a group of writers, or how is it?
In our case, no. It's one writer, but the process of writing took the various stages. The first thing that Vincent did was research a number of cases, many of them happening in the US. He contacted the researchers who wrote about these cases. As I said in the introduction, the play is based mainly on two real-life cases. We discussed for a very long time, and one thing we definitely didn't want to do is create something which is completely fictional and has no roots in reality. The subject is so, like sentimental for a lot of people when you're talking about death and family, that we wanted to make sure that it's something that is realistic. We then went through a phase of speaking with people who all gave their input, coming from different backgrounds. We spoke to people from theology, from medicine, from the legal system, from people writing things like patients' rights, children's advocates. So there were a lot of people giving in their input. The first draft, which was much, much shorter than the final version, was premiered when the partners came to Malta. So we could get a taste of what an international audience, although a very select audience, but still an international audience, would feel about the piece. And then there was a series of meeting with people from literature to see the literary value and how it communicates to people who might not have English as their first language. Vincent, by the way, is a bilingual writer, like people in Malta. It's a bilingual country. He writes in both languages. But his training in writing in English is for the BBC, for people who, of course, have a very high level of English. So we debated a lot on the linguistic qualities of the piece. And when the director was chosen, she left a mark as well on the script itself, because we have that kind of relationship. It's not a script is given to the director and nothing can be touched or changed. There were a lot of scenes that were changed, new nuances came in, the subplot that we did not see today of Emma and her friend who's a Muslim, but also is brought up in certain traditions of faith and how it affects her life choices. So these all came in later. So there was a series of phases, let's put it this way, but the writer remained, the focal point remained one person.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said about all these experts who were brought in, because somehow those voices could be brought in. When I saw it, I liked it. I think it's kind of tracked in a way that's like a traditional play would be, so that you have it's an emotional, psychological engagement, whereas you had all these, with this clinical stuff, it'd be interesting to hear what those pockets were saying to create that sense of polylocality, to almost interrupt the text and to confront the text with all the research you've done to bring some of those voices back into it. And I think you could interpolate it without, where you have, what I mean by that is, it's almost like where you put, you have a play and then you want to insert monologues or you want to insert songs, but you find points where those expert voices or all these people that you've consulted with, which sound very interesting, because then you get a different type of vocal thing too, rather than a psychological thing. It's kind of a professional sounding or a different type of discourse. So you're playing with different discourses. So I mean, rather than trying to maybe deconstruct a little bit, but you can have the psychological going against these kind of other voices that I think would give you, get the best of both worlds, if you will.
Yes, yes. What was interesting as well, this play has already been staged because we wrote in English, so of course it was a bit easier, and our playwright is very prolific, and although it took him over a year to write it, but still we already staged the play in January. It was staged at St. James Cavalier, which is a theatre in Valletta, which is a theatre in the round. So the actors had a lot of dynamics, but it was even, I think, very emotional for them.
You guys from Malta?
Yes. They were two of the 10 actors that were part.
Yeah, the other thing is, if we could hear some Maltese, you know what I mean? Some Maltese stuff. I mean, that would be, to get that kind of flavor. And it's not a big thing to do, but I mean, to get that vibe, it's something that I would like to feel more of the grit of the world. I mean, collaborators, more like these collaborators from the early part and the Maltese aspect, because that's very unique, okay? It's something that we don't know much about it. We want to know, and so we want to know what's particularly.
In fact, the setting is, although, as Joyce said, it's an international kind of theme, a universal theme. But,
Yeah.
sometimes the setting isn't really Malta. In fact, it's British. So yeah.
Well, maybe bring that sense of otherness into it then. That's something that, even if it's using the Maltese language and it's difficult for the other character to understand, so that there's like a cultural traditions that are being brought in, that are being confronted. That adds a level of this kind of polyglobal interest, I think, that could that would augment.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we discussed with the author, I told him try and put in some nationalities into the characters, and that's why you have an Italian hospital administrator, you have a Belgian pediatrician, there's another character of the Muslim background. So of course you're looking at different people with different nationalities, but some of them sharing the same belief, others not. So that's why we try to introduce characters who come from different countries, to try and put in a bit more of this flavor, if you like, to the character.
I would like to keep it here because of the conversation. I just wanna, if you can just see briefly what's gonna happen with the play now, and just all these plays that have been produced with the EU Collective Plays will be put together in an anthology and published in the later this year, next year. So we will have the possibility to have them all together. But if you can just briefly say what's the next stage for your project, and then we can wrap it up for tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, we can start
now,
there.
I will have part of the creation. We are just we are working in this moment, but we will work on a part at Unheard Festival. So starting at half of the August.
Festival Poetere dell'Arte
Poetere dell'Arte, in Italy, a bit as well. And we make another part of the work. I hope we are ready with the FURA at the foundation in Barcelona. And after we put all the material together, normally for the International Festival in Brussels, we do that. And so it will track all the big.
Yes.
So in the next spring.
Yes, great.
So in our case, the play is staged. What we're looking forward to is the anthology, as you mentioned, and also the possibility of having the script performed in another country. I would really like to see the play evolve, because although it's been performed, it doesn't mean that the script has died or is at a standstill, but we'd like to see it taken by some other country and given a whole new dimension. So that would be something to look forward to.
Yes.
We had a reading of the play for the Young People's Festival in Belfast, and they are now going to co-produce it with us for their the Young Art Festival in March 2019.
Great. Okay, thank you so much for
Something about darkness for us. Some information for us about darkness.
Well, we can talk about it later.
There's a
but,
man frantically pointing
yeah.
at us watching.